Hello everyone, my name is Emile Savalle from Inria Rennes, and I'll be presenting our study called Does Your Brain Feel Virtual Touch as a Physical Touch? In it, we study the influence of haptic feedbacks and cognitive workload on the perception of touch in VR. This study was done in collaboration with Pillette, Kyung, Ferran, Argelaguet, Anatole, Lécuyer, and Marc, Macé. So here we first focused on avatar, our virtual body in VR, and the core concept associated with it, embodiment. It's usually split in a few subcategories, such as ownerships, which define how well do you feel that this body is yours, and agency, how well can you control it. And if developed well enough, a strong embodiment can lead to behavioral change in users. They will tend to treat their body as if it were real, for example, by avoiding danger that they see. Or we can see the appearance of phantom sensation. These are events where a user will interact with the virtual world, and while there is no physical contact, they can report feeling sensation at the location of the interaction. And so, in our first question in the study, we want to investigate how similarly process our virtual touch to physical ones. The second aspect relates to the modulation of touch perception, and we want to investigate whether our virtual contact with the environment are affected in the same way as physical one. And to do so, we investigate cognitive workload, because we know that a high cognitive load can reduce tactile sensitivity. For example, we can develop methods to measure workload based on the response to tactile sensation, such as in the tactile detection response task, to gain information about the level of workload of a user. However, in the literature, there is a gap as we lack information about the impact of workload on the response, and also if it will affect a visual one as well as a physical touch. And so, the second aspect of the study is to investigate does cognitive workload impact touch perception. So, to do so, we developed an experiment where we had 32 participants come for a 1 or 2 hour session that we split in 2 steps. The first one, where we investigate if the virtual touch are processed as a physical one, we develop a virtual environment where a user is given a virtual body that matches their gender and skin color. And in the scene, we used a virtual robot that is a simulation of a physical one, also present in the experiment, that can match the movement and speed of the physical one. Both robots are equipped with a soft foam ball as effector that is used to apply a stimulation. And using both this robot, we developed 2 kinds of stimulation. First, a visual haptic touch, or physical touch, where both robots move simultaneously to develop a small contact with the participant hand or the avatar's one. And the second one is a visual touch. Here, only the virtual robot is applying a touch to the user avatar. In the second step of the experiment, we investigate whether the cognitive workload impacts the perception of touch. Here, we compared our 2 kinds of stimulation against 2 levels of workload. And to do so, we developed an end-back task in the experiment. An end-back task is a traditional workload task where we present a series of characters to the user and we ask them to respond if the character presented is similar to the precedent one. And it allows us to create 2 levels of workload. First, low difficulty with a 1 back, where the participant is asked to respond if the character presented is the same as the precedent one, or high difficulty with a 3 back, where the participant has to respond if the number is the same as the third last precedent number. And so we collected our data from our participants, and we first investigated whether our virtual touch are similarly processed as a physical one. So first we looked in the EEG activity, where does the activity and the neural response arise. we've seen that for both kind of stimulation, we had a strong activation of the sensorimotor cortex, and especially over the electrode CP4, which is over a brain area that is linked to the processing of movement and sensation of the left hand, which was the one stimulated in our study. And we looked at first, this is event-rated potential, which is the average response to the physical and visual stimulation. And we see in blue the physical stimulation, and in orange the visual one. So while we see that the response to the physical stimulation is far stronger than the visual one, both responses elicit a similar pattern, especially in the same area. Secondly, when we investigate event-rated synchronization or desynchronization, this is when we observe a change in power frequency in the brain following the stimulation. We see that both responses are similar for both visual and physical one. However, we observe still a difference between physical stimulation, still in blue, and a visual one in delta frequency, where the response to the physical stimulation is stronger than the visual one. But still, this information shows us that a virtual touch engages the same brain area as a physical one, and that can lead to real sensation being felt without a physical stimulation. And in the second aspect, where we investigate whether cognitive workload impacts the perception of touch, here we still look at event-rated potential, where we have in blue the response to physical touch under low cognitive load, in green under high cognitive load for the physical touch, and in red the response to the visual touch with high cognitive load, and orange with low cognitive load. And here we saw that this cognitive load had a strong impact on the response to the physical stimulation, reducing significantly the amplitude of the event-rated potential, but has no impact on our visual stimulation. Again, when we investigate the event-rated synchronization following this touch, we've seen similar pattern of activation, and especially for delta frequency, we've seen that a high cognitive load reduces the amplitude of the IRIS for both physical and visual stimulation. So this shows us that we can observe the impact of cognitive load on the EEG, and especially that it reduces when the cognitive load increases. But we don't have enough information yet to indicate whether cognitive load has a strong and recurrent impact on our visual stimulation. So in conclusion, in this study, we investigated whether our visual and physical touch were similarly processed by the brain, and we saw that both stimulation engages similar brain process and areas as physical touch, which indicates that this avatar stimulation can be perceived as real and can create, quote, sensation in the participant without ever having a physical contact. And secondly, we investigated the impact of cognitive workload on touch perception. There we've seen that a high cognitive load really reduces significantly the perception of a haptic touch, physical one, and this impact on of the cognitive load can be measured in the brain activity. And this can allow us to create passive BCI based on haptic feedback in order to monitor cognitive workload. However, this workload has a weak impact on the perception of virtual touch, which would require further investigation to really figure out the extent of the impact of cognitive workload on virtual touch. Thank you for your attention.